Chapter 3: Defining False Doctrine. There are many myths and misconceptions surrounding the term false doctrine or false teaching. If you Google or type in the word on any search engine, all kinds of theories and conspiracies, most of which are usually associated with vicious personal attacks on megachurch pastors, popular televangelists, or contemporary rich preachers will come up. But what really makes one a false teacher? Does owning a private jet or leading a large congregation necessarily make one a perpetrator of false doctrines? The Gospel affirmed that not even Jesus was immune to criticisms, controversy, and negativity, and on numerous occasions during his earthly ministry, even the father of our faith himself, he too was also accused by his opponents of blasphemy, gluttony, drunkenness, to mention but a few. The Pharisees even likened him to a false prophet, casting out demons with Beelzebub, chief of devils, as seen in Luke 11 verse 15. Paul the apostle too, due to the unique circumstances that surrounded his apostolic calling, had to constantly battle with accusation of false apostleship throughout his whole entire ministry. As an illustration, most scholars hold that Paul's second epistle to the saints in Corinth was notably written in defense of his character and apostleship against the false teachers who were constantly trying to discredit him and question his authority in the church at Corinth. So, how was the first century Christian church able to tell the difference between actual heretics, their heresies, from the real deed? To give an instance, why didn't Apollos get a false teacher treatment when he first met with Priscilla and Aquila? St. Luke, the historian, in Acts 18:24 to 28, records the testimony of Apollos in this manner. Now, a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man and mighty in the scriptures, came to Ephesus. This man had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he spoke and taught accurately the things of the Lord, though he knew only the baptism of John. So he began to speak boldly in the synagogue. When Aquila and Priscilla heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately. Is there a way that false teachers can be identified without any prejudice, suspicions, or personal convictions? What does false teaching actually mean in a biblical sense? What are the diverse kinds of false doctrines prevalent today? What should a believer do about these false doctrines? These questions and many others will be investigated upon this chapter. 3.1: What false doctrine is not? Although heresy in the New Testament is often very closely linked to hypocrisy, apostasy, schisms, and false testimonies, it should be differentiated. 1. Hypocrisy. Hypocrisy refers to the so-called believers' false appearance of goodness. It is worthy of note that although Jesus frequently accused the Pharisees of being hypocrites, he did not necessarily call them false teachers. Jesus' main issue with the Pharisees was not their doctrine as such, but that they really practiced what they preached. And whenever they did practice what they preached, it was never genuinely unto God, but it was just for eye service. Scott McKnight, in his article Heretic versus Hypocrite, insists that although to be a hypocrite, hypothetically speaking, is to be a false teacher who leads both self and others astray from the will of God, the term should not be limited to contradiction between appearance and reality, which is the classic definition of hypocrisy. Secondly, apostasy. Apostasy, on the other hand, refers to a departure or a falling away of believers from the faith. In his book The Truth War, John MacArthur described an apostate as a defector from the truth, someone who has known the truth, given some show of affirmation to it, perhaps even proclaimed it for a while, but then rejected it in the end. The typical apostate may still purport to believe the truth and proclaim the truth, but in reality he opposes the truth and undermines it. He is a traitor to the faith and secretly an enemy in the truth war. but he wants everybody else to think otherwise. Most apostates seek to remain within a church and actively seek acceptance among the people of God. Because everything they do undermines the faith and corrupts the truth, such people poses a grave danger to the health of the flock, even though they usually bend over backward to appear friendly, likable, and pious. That is why Jesus compares them to ravenous wolves in sheep's clothing. The early church father Origen and most scholars of his opinion and his time equated Lucifer's fall to apostasy. This opinion, however, is held by most that the devil was an angel and that having become an apostate, he induced as many of the angels as possible to fall away with himself. And these, up to this present time, are called his angels. Thirdly, schisms. Schisms is commonly defined as a formal split of a church due to doctrinal differences. It is equally important to recognize that throughout church history, there had always been ongoing debates over certain doctrinal issues, which in most cases is what had led to the many schisms and various denominations in Christendom today. Even Apostle Peter had to admit that some parts of Paul's letters were often very difficult to understand. It is very critical to note that Peter here did not necessarily mean that Paul taught false doctrines, but rather some very deep revelations which could easily be misinterpreted by the young in the faith. Even Jesus told his disciples at one point that although he still had much to say to them, they couldn't yet bear it to hear it at least at that time. In his parable, new wine in old wineskins, Jesus implied that it was far easier sometimes to teach new approaches to new students as the old tend to always be very biased, defensive, and are apt to disregard any contradictory teaching to what they already know. Likewise, today in many branches of Christianity, there still exist many deep, such debatable doctrinal issues and various different theories, most of which their arguments deeply lie in the biblical hermeneutics and unique exegesis of preachers and theologians alike. Although these various teachings may not generally be considered false doctrines as such, nonetheless, they are often the basis of the many schisms between one denominations from the other. It is not fair, therefore, to lump every Christian who has different views to yours together with false teachers. The list below provides some examples of some of these controversial doctrinal issues which have been propagated throughout church history. For example, Trinity versus oneness, tithing versus giving, cessation versus continuance, predestination versus free will, reprobation versus depravity, the many atonement theories and the various Milenas views, Christ's descent into hell, and so on and so forth.